He was the last man in history to hold the entire Roman world in his hands. After his final breath, the empire broke apart, never to be reunited again. This is the story of Theodosius the Great, the emperor who marked the end of an era. For over 1,000 years, Rome worshipped the Olympians. Theodosius didn't just ignore them, he declared war on them. He extinguished the eternal fire, ended the Olympic Games, and made Christianity the only law of the land. This is how one man changed the religion of the West forever. Imagine an emperor, the most powerful man on earth, on his knees, begging for forgiveness in the dirt. Why? Because he had just ordered the massacre of 7,000 of his own citizens. This is the dark and dramatic story of Theodosius and the massacre of Thessalonica. He was the last emperor to rule both East and West. He made Christianity the state religion and ended the Olympic Games. But his legacy is stained by a brutal massacre and a final permanent division of the Roman world. In this documentary, we explore the pivotal reign of Theodosius I, the Great. Rising to power after the catastrophic disaster at Adrianople, Theodosius was tasked with saving a crumbling empire. We uncover how he negotiated a controversial peace with the Goths, settling them inside Roman borders, a decision that would have fatal consequences for Rome. We dive deep into his religious revolution, the Edict of Thessalonica, the persecution of pagans, the closing of the temples, and the end of the ancient Olympic Games. Finally, we examine the dark side of his rule, the horrific massacre of Thessalonica, and his dramatic confrontation with St. Ambrose, the bishop who forced an emperor to his knees. I'm Czar. This is the place where we uncover the history they didn't teach you in school. Today's topic is Theodosius I. He extinguished the Olympic flame, shut down the Oracle of Delphi, and made Christianity the only legal religion in Rome. He fundamentally changed the software of Western civilization. But was it a holy mission or a political power grab? Let's find out. Before we start, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on so you never miss an episode. Let's dive in. Here is a detailed historical breakdown of Theodosius I's life and reign, structured as a script outline or deep dive research for your video. This covers the truth behind his titles and the major events that defined the end of the United Roman Empire. The Western Emperor, Gratian, is overwhelmed. He needs a co-emperor for the East but has no family members left to appoint. He turns to a retired general from Spain, Theodosius. Theodosius wasn't the first choice. He was the only choice. He inherited a nightmare, an empire with no army, a treasury drained, and a massive refugee invader crisis. The Gothic Treaty, a fatal compromise in 382 AD. Theodosius tried to fight the Goths but failed. The Roman army was too weak to push them out. The Foedus of 382, he signed a revolutionary and controversial treaty. For the first time, a barbarian tribe was allowed to settle inside Roman borders, south of the Danube, not as scattered farmers, but as a unified, autonomous nation with their own leaders and weapons. The consequence of that treaty, they became foederati, allies. In the short term, this gave Theodosius a new army of Gothic mercenaries. In the long term, it planted a state within a state that would eventually sack Rome under Alaric, who fought for Theodosius, just 15 years after his death. The Edict of Thessalonica, 380 AD, Theodosius didn't just favor Christianity. He made Nicene Christianity the only legal version of the faith. He declared that all subjects must believe in the Trinity, branding Arians, who had ruled for decades, as madmen and heretics. The war on paganism, the eternal fire. Under his laws, the sacred fire of Vesta in Rome, which had burned for over 1,000 years, was extinguished, and the Vestal virgins disbanded. In 393 AD, he banned the ancient Olympic Games dedicated to Zeus, ending a tradition that had lasted over a millennium. He turned a blind eye, or actively encouraged, monks and bishops who destroyed masterpieces of ancient art, including the famous Serapeum in Alexandria. A popular charioteer in Thessalonica was arrested for trying to seduce a male servant. The mob rioted and killed the Roman military commander, Gothic. Theodosius, known for his temper, ordered immediate retaliation. He told his Gothic troops to surround the hippodrome, circus, and kill everyone inside. The result, 7,000 citizens, men, women, and children, were slaughtered in 3 hours. Dear friends, it was a confrontation. This is the most dramatic moment of his reign. St. Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan, excommunicated the emperor. He physically blocked Theodosius from entering the church, telling him, "You have imitated David in his crime, now imitate him in his repentance." In a shocking display of the church's new power, Theodosius submitted. He stripped off his imperial robes and spent months weeping in the dirt, begging for forgiveness before he was allowed back into the church. A usurper named Eugenius seized the West, supported by pagan senators who wanted to restore the old gods. A battle of the Frigidus, 394 AD started. Theodosius marched west to fight him. The battle was decided by a miraculous wind, the Bora, that blew the enemy's arrows back into their faces. Theodosius won, becoming the sole ruler of the entire Roman world. Friends, this was the end of emperor. He held this united empire for only 4 months. In January 395 AD, he died of edema swelling in Milan. On his deathbed, he did what he thought was right, but what ultimately doomed the empire. He split it permanently between his 2 young sons. Honorius, aged 10, got the West. It would fall in 80 years. Arcadius, aged 17, got the East. It would become the Byzantine Empire. Theodosius the Great managed to hold the empire together for one last moment, but the price he paid, empowering the Goths and establishing a state religion, changed the course of history forever. He was the bridge between the ancient Roman world and the medieval Christian world. The Battle of Adrianople had just happened. Emperor Valens was dead. 20,000 to 30,000 elite soldiers were dead. This wasn't just numbers. This was the comitatancies, the professional, mobile field army of the East. Dear fellows, there was a vacuum. There were no officers left to give orders, no administrators to collect taxes in the region. The Goths, led by Fritigern, were roaming freely, burning villages all the way to the walls of Constantinople. They couldn't take the walled cities, so they ravaged the countryside, starving the population. Gratian, Valens' nephew, was in the west. He was young, 19, overwhelmed by his own border wars, and terrified to march east after seeing his uncle annihilated. The problem was, Gratian needed a partner. He couldn't rule alone. But who? The house of Constantine was dead. The house of Valentinian was just Gratian and his child brother, Valentinian II. The resurrection was, he turned to Theodosius. This is a crucial point about hypocrisy, politics. Just a few years earlier, Theodosius's father, Count Theodosius, a great general, had been executed for treason by the imperial court. Theodosius himself had been forced into early retirement on his family estates in Spain. The actual irony, Rome was so desperate they had to beg the man whose father they murdered to come back and save them. Gratian promotes Theodosius to Augustus, emperor of the East at Sirmium. It seems his strategy was like scraping the barrel. Theodosius arrived in Thessalonica, his new HQ, and found nothing. He had no army. He did something shocking for a Roman leader. He conscripted farmers who had never held a spear, often dragging them from their fields. He enacted harsh laws. Men were cutting off their own thumbs to avoid the draft. Theodosius passed a law saying they still had to serve, and if they couldn't, their town had to provide 2 men in their place. This was a dangerous move. He began hiring Goths to fight Goths. He recruited deserters and barbarians directly into the Roman ranks because he had no time to train Romans. He didn't realize the reason of the failure that was the campaign of 380 AD. Dear fellows, history books often skip this, but Theodosius actually failed militarily at first. In 380 AD, he marched his new ragtag army out to fight Fritigern's Goths. The Romans were beaten. The discipline wasn't there. The Gothic mercenaries in Roman pay were unreliable. Theodosius himself fell deathly ill in Thessalonica, where he was baptized. For a moment it looked like the East was finished. Theodosius realized he could not win on the battlefield. The Roman way of total conquest was dead. If he couldn't kill them, he had to buy them. The myth of the savior of Theodosius didn't swoop in and crush the barbarians. He actually lost battles. His genius wasn't military victory. It was political survival. Oranically, this was the moment the Roman army changed forever. It stopped being a disciplined legion of Roman citizens and started becoming a mercenary force of barbarians fighting for the highest bidder. Theodosius didn't save the Roman army, he replaced it. As highlighted in this video, the thumb cutting, it shows how terrified the average Roman citizen was. They preferred mutilation to facing the Goths. Theodosius had to force them to fight. Here is a detailed breakdown for the darkest and most dramatic segment of your video. The massacre of Thessalonica. The setting. Thessalonica, one of the empire's most important cities. 1. The people are obsessed with chariot racing. The Roman military commander of the city, a Goth named Gothic, arrests a superstar charioteer. The charioteer tried to sexually assault a male cupbearer, some sources say a servant in a tavern. Under Theodosius's new strict moral laws, this was a crime. The people demand their hero be released for the upcoming races. Gothic refuses. The mob explodes. They attack the garrison, drag Gothic into the street, and beat him to death. Theodosius is in Milan. When he hears his general was killed by a mob, he flies into a volcanic rage. He doesn't order an investigation. He orders immediate total retaliation. He sends a message to Thessalonica announcing a special extra set of chariot races to celebrate. Thousands of citizens pack the hippodrome, circus. They are cheering, expecting entertainment. Suddenly, the heavy iron gates are locked. It wasn't Roman legionaries who entered the stands. It was Gothic mercenaries. Dear fellows, this is crucial. Theodosius used barbarians to kill Roman citizens. For 3 hours, they hacked everyone to pieces. Men, women, children, the elderly. The death toll. 7,000 people died in a single afternoon. Theodosius calms down and tries to recall the order, but it's too late. The news reaches Milan. The Bishop of Milan is the only man brave enough to stand up to him. He writes a letter telling the emperor he is covered in blood and cannot enter the house of God. Theodosius tries to go to church anyway. Ambrose physically blocks the door or refuses to say Mass. He delivers the famous line, "You have imitated David in his crime, murder. Now imitate him in his repentance." Dear fellows, the penance, a shift in world power. This is a turning point in history. For the first time, the church commands the state. Theodosius strips off his purple imperial robes. He wears sackcloth, rough rags. He does not stand. He kneels in the dirt outside the church. He stays there weeping and begging for forgiveness for 8 months. On the Christmas day, 390 AD, Ambrose finally allows him back in to receive communion, but only after Theodosius passes a law saying all death sentences must have a 30-day waiting period to prevent another rage-fueled massacre. What do you say, dear fellows? Does a man who tricks 7,000 innocent people into a stadium to slaughter them deserve to be called the Great or Saint? But this was the rise of theocracy. Point out that this moment changed the software of Western civilization. Before this, the emperor was a god or above the law. After this, the emperor is subject to the church. Ambrose proved that religious power greater than political power. Let us don't miss the racial angle. The general killed was a Goth. The soldiers who massacred the Romans were Goths. Theodosius allowed the barbarians to slaughter his own citizens to avenge one of their own. This deepened the hatred between Romans and Goths, leading to the sack of Rome later. The final split, 395 AD. This is the conclusion of our video about Theodosius, explaining how his death marked the permanent end of a unified Roman Empire. The death of Theodosius, January 17th, 395 AD, just 4 months after defeating the usurper Eugenius and reuniting the empire, Theodosius falls ill in Milan. He suffers from severe edema, swelling, dropsy. On his deathbed, he doesn't just die, he orchestrates the final division of the Roman world. He summons his younger son Honorius to his bedside. The decision, he believes the empire is too big and too dangerous for one man to rule alone, a lesson learned from the crisis of the 3rd century. He decides to split the administration permanently between his two sons. Let men remind you once again, the East, the future Byzantine Empire, the ruler Arcadius, age 17, the capital Constantinople, the wealthier, more urbanized half, Greece, Anatolia, Syria, Egypt, and the Balkans. It had the money, the trade routes, and the population. And the West, the doomed empire ruler, Honorius, age 10. Capital Milan later moved to Ravenna to hide from barbarians. The poorer, more rural half, Italy, Gaul, France, Spain, Britain, and North Africa. It had the longest borders to defend and the least money to pay for it. The angle main is the puppets and the warlords. Theodosius didn't leave the empire to his sons, he left it to his generals. Both Arcadius and Honorius were incompetent and weak. Stilicho Theodosius appointed his trusted half-Vandal general, Stilicho, as the guardian of Honorius in the west. Stilicho became the actual ruler of the west. In the east, the corrupt Praetorian prefect Rufinus seized control of Arcadius. Dear fellows, the conflict was, instead of helping each other, the two halves immediately turned on one another. The ministers, Stilicho versus Rufinus, began a cold war, refusing to send troops to help the other side. When the Visigoth leader Alaric rebelled, because Theodosius died and his treaty ended, the East encouraged him to go invade the West, effectively weaponizing the barbarians against their own brother empire. The consequence of it, a permanent break. Let us think why this time was different. The empire had been split before, e.g., Diocletian, Constantine's sons, but it had always been reunited by a strong man. This time, it never went back. Reasons of it was the divergence. The East became Greek-speaking, bureaucratic, and wealthy. It survived for another 1,000 years. The West became a feudal, military dictatorship run by warlords Stilicho, Aetius, Ricimer, behind puppet emperors until it collapsed in 476 AD. Dear fellows, the gift that poisoned Rome was, Theodosius thought he was saving the empire by splitting the burden. In reality, he severed the West's lifeline. Without the money from the East, the West couldn't pay its army to fight the Goths. And the child emperors highlight the absurdity of leaving the world's greatest superpower to a 10-year-old and a 17-year-old while barbarians were inside the gates. Dear fellows, Theodosius was the last man to ever call himself emperor of the whole Roman Empire. After 395, Rome was effectively two different countries pretending to be one. Dear fellows, if we look at his family life, Theodosius married twice, and each marriage served a specific purpose. First wife was Aelia Flaccilla, the pious mother. She was a Spanish noblewoman, like Theodosius. She was deeply religious and instrumental in Theodosius's push for Nicene Christianity. She was revered as a saintly figure who cared for the disabled and poor children. She gave birth to the two male heirs, Arcadius and Honorius, before dying in 386 AD. Second wife was Galla, the political bridge. This was a strategic power move. Galla was the daughter of the former Emperor Valentinian and sister to Emperor Valentinian II. By marrying her, Theodosius linked his new dynasty to the old established Valentinianic dynasty, giving his children immense legitimacy. She had a daughter, Galla Placidia, who would go on to have one of the most dramatic lives in Roman history, captured by Goths, queen of the Visigoths, and later ruling empress of the West. He extinguished the Olympic flame. He silenced the Oracle of Delphi. And on his deathbed, he cut the Roman world in half forever. Theodosius thought he was saving the empire by splitting it between his sons. In reality, he was signing the death warrant for the West. Rome didn't fall in a day. It fell the moment Theodosius closed his eyes. Thanks for watching. This is Czar and Truth. Subscribe, like, share, and comments. It keep me motivated for the next chapter.